Friends, thank you for being here today. What if I told you that the single most dominant foreign power in South America today isn't the United States? And that this new power isn't just a quiet trading partner, but is actively building the continent's future, its ports, its power grids, and its digital networks. For more than a century, if you looked at the political geography of the Western Hemisphere, this would have been unthinkable. One fact was simple and non negotiable. Latin America was, in no uncertain terms, Washington's backyard. This concept
that say Black trans lives matter
through a combination of overwhelming economic leverage, covert intervention, and cultural dominance. It defined the United States as the uncontested hemispheric hegemon. Today, I'm here to tell you that era is definitively over. The unthinkable has become the new reality. The concept of an exclusive American sphere of influence is an anachronism, a relic of a unipolar moment that has evaporated with stunning speed. A profound geopolitical realignment is underway, and it is not being driven by Washington. Instead, a new, ambitious, and extraordinarily wealthy power has crossed the Pacific and, in the span of a single generation, redrawn the economic and political map of the Americas. Now, it's hard to overstate just how massive this transformation is. But let's just look at the data. The economic relationship between China and the nations of Latin America is perhaps the most significant global trade story of this century. Total trade between the two regions has skyrocketed from approximately $12 billion in the year 2000 to a staggering, almost incomprehensible total of over $500 billion by 2024. This is not a gradual shift. It is a 40-fold explosion of commerce. This meteoric rise has come at the direct expense of the United States, where American firms and the U.S. government were once the only partners of consequence. China has methodically and decisively displaced them. Today, China stands as the primary trading partner for nearly every single nation in South America. The case of Brazil, the region's largest economy, illustrates this new reality perfectly. Brazil's bilateral trade with China, valued at over $180 billion annually, is now more than double the volume of its trade with the United States. This economic re-anchoring is not an accident. It's not the result of a single, simple cause. It is the calculated outcome of a three-pronged dynamic, a perfect storm of geopolitical change. Today, I want to talk about these three forces. First, we have China's deliberate, patient, and incredibly effective pull strategy, which masterfully blends economic, diplomatic, and technological incentives. Second, we'll look at a direct consequence of America's own failures, a push strategy defined by historical baggage, modern-day neglect, and a hostile, all-stick, no-carrot approach. And finally, we'll discuss why this is a conscious, pragmatic choice by Latin American nations themselves, which are now leveraging this new great power competition to assert their own sovereignty. So let's start with that first, and arguably most important factor, China's proactive pull strategy. This isn't just a haphazard collection of opportunistic deals. It is a comprehensive, deeply integrated, and patient grand strategy. It's a multi decade project to secure China's own future while methodically building a new Sino-centric global order. And this strategy operates on four distinct levels at the same time. The first level, and the most fundamental, is all about economic and resource security. At its core, the Chinese Communist Party views the securing of raw materials, food, and energy as a matter of national survival. To fuel its 1.4 billion person economy and dominate the industries of the future, China has methodically re engineered its global supply chains. And Latin America is the new centerpiece of this architecture. In agriculture, China has strategically shifted its food security reliance away from the United States, its primary geopolitical rival, American farmers, once the primary suppliers have been replaced. Today, nations like Brazil and Argentina are China's top suppliers of essential commodities like soybeans and corn. This isn't just a commercial preference, it's a strategic diversification to ensure its food supply cannot be held hostage by Washington. Even more critical is China's quest to secure the raw materials for the next generation of technology. Beijing is systematically moving to lock down the global supply of what are essentially the new oil of the 21st century, critical minerals. It has poured billions of dollars into the lithium triangle, the lithium rich salt flats of Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile, which collectively hold over half of the world's known reserves. By investing in and controlling the mines, China is ensuring it will dominate the global production of batteries for electric vehicles, smartphones, and large scale renewable energy storage. Simultaneously, Chinese state owned firms have taken control of significant copper operations in Peru and Chile, the world's two largest producers. As copper is an indispensable component for everything from EVs to the entire green energy grid, this represents a long term strategy to control the building blocks of the future. And finally, China has secured its present day energy needs, investing tens of billions into the region's energy sector. This ranges from high risk, high reward oil for loan deals with pariah states like Venezuela, where the U.S. will not or cannot operate, to becoming the single largest company for power generation and distribution in Brazil. China is not just trading with Latin America, it is embedding itself into the continent's most foundational economic sectors. The second part of this strategy is the most visible one: capital investment and infrastructure, largely orchestrated under the banner of the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI. Latin America suffers from a profound and chronic infrastructure deficit, a gap in ports, roads, railways, and power grids that has stifled its economic growth for decades. The United States and its attendant Western financial institutions, like the World Bank and the Inter American Development Bank, IDB, have failed to fill this gap. Into this vacuum, China has stepped with breathtaking speed and scale. Let me give you a statistic that should stop you in your tracks. China invests more in Latin American infrastructure than the World Bank, the IDB, and the Latin American Development Bank combined. Since the year 2005, China has pumped over $140 billion in state-backed loans and billions more in foreign direct investment into the region. This capital is the engine of the Belt and Road Initiative, which, as of 2024, over 20 Latin American countries, fully two-thirds of the region, have formally joined. This is not just a line on a balance sheet. It is changing the physical landscape of the continent. China is building the hard assets of the new economy. The most potent symbol of this is the new megaport in Chancay, Peru. Financed and built by Chinese state-owned firms, Chancay is a deep-water port designed to accommodate the world's largest container ships. It is a logistical game changer, a future continental hub that will allow South American goods from Peruvian copper to Brazilian soy to be shipped directly to Shanghai, cutting transit times by weeks and, for the first time, effectively bypassing traditional U.S.-controlled shipping routes. This physical rerouting of global trade is complemented by China's presence at another, even more critical choke point, the Panama Canal. Chinese-linked companies now operate the key terminals at both the Atlantic and Pacific ends of the canal. While the U.S. technically maintains security oversight of the canal itself, China's commercial operation of the ports gives it unparalleled logistical leverage and insight into the flow of global commerce, much of which is bound for American shores. From building one of Bolivia's largest steel plants to financing railways across the Andes, China is quite literally building the new Latin America. This brings us to China's third pillar, a sophisticated and relentless campaign of diplomatic and soft power engagement. Unlike the U.S., which has often treated the region with benign neglect, China has made Latin America a core diplomatic priority. And the first rule of diplomacy is simple. You have to show up. Chinese President Xi Jinping has visited the region multiple times since taking office, far more than the combined presidential visits of Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and Joe Biden. China regularly hosts high-level summits, such as the China CELAC Forum, massive events to which every nation in the hemisphere, save the US and Canada, is invited. At these forums, China is the convener, the agenda setter, and the benefactor. While the US is conspicuously absent, this diplomacy is wrapped in a powerful and resonant global South rhetoric. China does not present itself as a new hegemon, but as the world's largest developing nation and a partner in a community of shared future. It frames its relationship as one of equals, standing shoulder to shoulder with Latin America against a history of Western colonialism and American bullying and tyranny. This narrative of solidarity is powerfully effective in a region deeply skeptical of U.S. intentions. And this soft power is backed by hard cash in the form of highly visible public goodwill projects. China provides massive gifts that win the hearts and minds of the public, such as a brand new state-of-the-art national library and a modern soccer stadium in El Salvador. During the COVID-19 pandemic, China executed a diplomatic masterstroke, providing over $500 million in medical supplies, loans, and vaccine donations at a time when the United States was hoarding its own supplies. These tangible benefits extend to the average citizen, as China offers visa waiver programs to countries like Brazil and Argentina, a simple but profoundly effective move to deepen ties beyond trade. Finally, the fourth part of China's strategy is its ground level technological and commercial penetration. While governments are signing multi-billion-dollar infrastructure deals, a quieter, more granular acquisition of influence is happening in the pockets and on the screens of average citizens. Chinese companies are dominating the region's consumer technology market. In cities from Mexico City to Sao Paulo, affordable, high specification smartphone brands like Xiaomi and Huawei are ubiquitous. Apple, by contrast, is a luxury good, largely absent from the market. Chinese brands are the workhorses of the new middle class, and with them comes their software and their ecosystem. This extends to digital platforms. In many countries, Chinese-owned ride-sharing apps like Didi Chuxing are aggressively outcompeting Uber, offering lower prices to consumers and, critically, better commissions to drivers. In Brazil, the ride-sharing app 99, owned by Didi, has integrated a digital payments platform, a classic Chinese tech strategy of creating a super app that locks in users and captures vast amounts of data. This digital integration is mirrored in the financial sector. The state-owned Industrial and Commercial Bank of China, ICBC, one of the world's largest banks, has a massive physical presence with over 100 retail outlets in Argentina alone. This provides the on-the-ground financial plumbing for Chinese projects and local businesses, creating an alternative financial ecosystem that does not depend on the US dollar. And all the while, China is shaping the narrative through its massive state-funded media network, CGTN. It broadcasts in Spanish and Portuguese, pushes a polished pro-Beijing narrative, and even hosts American academics to critique the dysfunction of the US political system. It is a sophisticated, multi-front information campaign to which the US has no effective answer. Now, China's historic rise in Latin America did not occur in a vacuum. Its pull strategy has been so effective because it was pushing against an open door, a door left open, and in many cases actively pushed open by the failures of American policy. This is the second great force at play, the U.S. push strategy, or what I'd call a total failure to compete. This self-defeating dynamic is built on three foundations: the unshakable burden of its own history, a period of profound contemporary neglect, and a complete failure to offer a viable alternative. First, we have to understand the burden of history. In the collective memory of Latin America, when the United States talks to them, it is not just a partner, it is a former imperial master. The long dark shadow of the Monroe Doctrine, a policy that explicitly framed the continent as America's property, still looms large. For decades, this policy was characterized by extractive economic relationships. It was defined by the Washington consensus loans offered with politically toxic conditions like forced austerity and privatization that often crushed local industries. Even more damaging is the legacy of direct intervention. From backing coups and brutal military dictatorships in Chile and Argentina, infamously through operations like Operation Condor, to the Iran Contra scandal in Nicaragua, the U.S. has a documented history of prioritizing its own geopolitical aims over the region's democracy and human rights. China, by contrast, arrives with no such baggage. Its stated policy of non interference is its single most powerful diplomatic tool. When Beijing offers billions for a port, it is not accompanied by a lecture on democratic norms or environmental standards. China is offering a simple, seductive deal: capital without condescension and investment without intervention. For a region fiercely protective of its sovereignty, this contrast is often the deciding factor. But this isn't just about ancient history. That burden is being compounded right now by America's contemporary neglect and antagonism. In the 21st century, the gaze of Washington has shifted. The region has become a strategic afterthought, deprioritized in favor of wars in the Middle East and the pivot to Asia. Worse, when the U.S. does turn its attention south, it is rarely with a vision of partnership. Instead, the U.S. government, in its public rhetoric, has reduced the region to a caricature, a source of problems to be managed. What is the conversation about? It's almost entirely dominated by negative threat-based issues: illegal immigration, the fentanyl crisis, and drug trafficking. This narrative is deeply insulting to a diverse continent of over 650 million people. While the U.S. is consumed by its own domestic political paralysis, China is seen as a reliable long-term partner. This neglect has been exacerbated by actively hostile economic policies. The America First tariffs inflicted real economic pain and shattered America's image as a reliable partner. Furthermore, the constant political threats of mass deportations create profound instability for economies that depend on remittances, money sent home by citizens working in the U.S. This U.S. policy directly threatens their economic lifeline, creating precisely the kind of desperation that makes China's no strings attached checkbook diplomacy so appealing. And finally, this all comes down to the crux of the modern American failure, what I call the all stick, no carrot approach. U.S. diplomacy in the region has been reduced to hectoring and warning. Washington officials travel to admonish Latin American leaders about the dangers of Chinese influence and the perils of debt trap diplomacy. But these warnings are hollow. They are hollow because they are not accompanied by any concrete, material, or competitive alternative. When a country needs a new port, a new power plant, or a new 5G network, China presents a fully funded plan. The United States presents a lecture. Grand American-led initiatives meant to counter China's BRI, like Build Back Better World, have been rhetorical exercises. They have failed to mobilize the necessary capital and have not materialized into a single significant project. This has left China as the only builder in town. This vacuum was created, in part, by the American private sector itself, which retreated from the region after the 2008 financial crisis. This all stems from the single greatest strategic miscalculation of the post-Cold War era, the belief that welcoming China into the WTO in 2001 would lead to its political liberalization. That plan backfired. The U.S. did not just help create its greatest economic competitor. By systematically neglecting its own neighborhood, it effectively held the door open and invited them in. So we've seen China's pull and America's push. That brings us to the third and final force I mentioned at the start, the Latin American rationale. It is a fundamental mistake to see this region as a passive chessboard. To cast Latin America as a prize being lost or taken is to miss the most important part of the story. The reality is that these nations are making active, pragmatic, and sovereign choices. Their leaders are not naive. They are clear-eyed agents pursuing their own national interests in a new multipolar world. This is perhaps the most misunderstood part of this entire geopolitical shift. We are not just witnessing an economic transaction, we are witnessing the birth of a new post-hegemonic political identity. For decades, Latin America's foreign policy was a simple binary choice. You were either with Washington or you were against it. Today, this new generation of leaders, from Boric in Chile to Lula in Brazil, is pioneering a third way, active non-alignment. This is not the passive neutrality of the old Cold War. It is an active strategy that sees the U.S.-China rivalry not as a threat to be feared, but as a historic opportunity to be leveraged. For the first time, they have options, they can play both sides, and in doing so, they are finally breaking free from the backyard mentality and asserting themselves as sovereign players in a multipolar world. This political identity is built on a foundation of raw, unavoidable economic necessity. The social contract in many Latin American nations is at a breaking point. Following the economic devastation of the pandemic, populations are grappling with deep-seated inequality, inflation, and stagnant growth. Their citizens are demanding results now. A political leader in Colombia, Peru, or Brazil cannot go to their people and say, we must endure another decade of crumbling bridges and slow internet because we have chosen to align with Washington's long-term strategic goals. They would be voted out of office. This is where the mismatch between the U.S. and Chinese offers becomes so stark. The United States offers abstract concepts, security partnerships, warnings about data privacy, and democracy promotion. China offers concrete, tangible, and most importantly, visible projects. They offer the new subway line that cuts a commuter's travel time in half. They offer the port that creates thousands of construction jobs. They offer the new soccer stadium, the new National Library. For a politician who needs to win the next election, a tangible victory today is infinitely more valuable than an abstract alliance tomorrow. This pragmatism extends to the region's technology choices. When Washington warns of the security risks of Huawei's 5G networks, it is perceived in many Latin American capitals as a rich country problem. For them, the choice is not between a secure American 5G network and a risky Chinese one. The choice is between a risky Chinese network and no network at all. China is offering affordable, good enough technology that can bring millions of people out of the digital divide and into the modern economy. The immediate urgent need for connectivity and development almost always trumps long-term abstract security fears. Finally, we must understand the Taiwan transaction from their perspective. When a country like El Salvador or Panama switches its diplomatic recognition from Taipei to Beijing, it is not seen from their point of view as some radical betrayal. They are simply aligning with the position held by the vast majority of the world, including the United States itself, which has adhered to a one China policy for decades. They are ending a historical anomaly. The fact that China then rewards this alignment with a massive non-refundable gift like a stadium or a library is simply seen as a pragmatic formalization of the new relationship. It's not a bribe, it's a signing bonus. This is the cold, hard, pragmatic calculation of national interest, and it is happening every single day. So, where does this all leave us? What are the stakes in this new hemispheric order? The tectonic plates of global power are grinding against each other, and Latin America has become a primary fault line. The old US-led order is fracturing, and the contours of a new, more contested era are taking shape in America's own hemisphere. The stakes for everyone involved are existential. For the United States, the consequences are catastrophic. It faces a strategic nightmare scenario where its primary geopolitical rival gains control over the supply chains for the entire next generation of industry. The U.S. is staring at a future where its ambitions in green energy, AI, and national defense are critically dependent on Chinese-controlled lithium and copper being extracted from its own backyard. This commercial vulnerability is matched by a political one. As its influence evaporates, the U.S. is losing its ability to cooperate on core national security issues, from managing migration to narcotics interdiction. Its voice, once the only one that mattered, is being drowned out. Most alarming are the direct security concerns. China's operation of dual-use facilities, most notably the Deep Space Ground Station in Argentina, a black box facility managed by an agency that reports directly to the People's Liberation Army, is not a commercial outpost. It is a strategic military foothold on the American continent, a direct challenge that the U.S. has proven powerless to stop. For Latin America, the future is a high wire act, a mix of immense opportunity and profound risk. On one hand, China's investment provides a once-in-a-generation chance to finally close its infrastructure gap and industrialize. On the other hand, it risks exchanging one master for another. The historical dependency on the West as a simple exporter of raw materials, the open veins of Latin America, could be perfectly replicated with China. The debt trap warnings, while often self-serving, are not baseless. The long-term risk of debt servitude and an erosion of sovereignty is real. The ultimate challenge for the region is whether it can successfully leverage this new partnership to move up the value chain to build its own 5G networks and AI industries, or whether it will be permanently locked into the age-old colonial role of simply digging things out of the ground. The future of the Western Hemisphere will be defined by that very question. The United States, for the first time in its history, is no longer the only or even the most attractive partner on offer. It is losing Latin America because China has shown up with a more compelling, better funded, and crucially, more respectful vision for a shared future. The Monroe Doctrine is not just dead, it is being buried, and its tomb is being financed with Chinese capital. Thank you.